Yeah, so off the top of my head, it's written by a lecturer, a tenured lecturer at a sort of average mid-table American college, talking about the state of the average college student today in terms of their like attendance to lectures and um, their their level of literacy and their level of understanding and their writing and their reliance on like AI and ChatGPT to do all their work and that sort of that loss of real learning and real thirst for knowledge in like the young people. And it was really interesting to me because it made me question quite a few things. It made me first question how powerful it's going to be able to understand, like learn and use words and that kind of that verbal fluency and like being able to comprehend great pieces of writing. I think that's obviously an exceptional skill now, but I feel like it will become more and more exceptional as time goes by because of this like chat GPTification of learning and of society as a whole. Um, and it also made me reflect on my own university experience. And I don't know if we should open up the conversation to both of us here about that in particular, because my attendance to lectures is bad. And when I question why that is, I don't think it's because I hate learning, because this podcast is about learning. It's about our collective journey of learning about the world and ourselves and refining our worldview. But I go to lectures because there's this deep, like rooted feeling in me when I'm there that it's not a good use of my time. Like it's not engaging. And these people have, they've got qualifications, they've done their time. Um, they've put in the hours of research and they know their topic well, but it's not engaging and it's not relevant. And there's a disconnection to me between what I learn at university and what I know about the world and what helps me live a better life. And so this article also pointed out to me that like, yeah, even the concept of university being a good thing is just dying and dying and dying. And I think that's also reflected in the average student's behavior now. Like university is not a respected thing. Um, I don't know. I think maybe I'll pause there and see what you think of what I've just said and whether you've got your own thoughts.
So I'd diagnose the problem by thinking like the exact reason why students don't respect university is because I think they've made it so accessible that everyone has a degree. And they then promote this desire to move away, to be set free, and to be hedonistic, which is something like that universities that students really want. And that then snowballs because with a higher demand of students wanting to go to university, the lower quality those students are, and those lower quality students will then get worse grades, and then and they won't try because they'll be busier living the lifestyle. Then the professors, instead of then the professors get pressure that they need a certain amount of the class to pass.
Yes, it didn't he, there was no point about that in the article about like, um, if he used the standards that he would want to, pretty much everyone would fail. But if you're not a tenured lecturer at that university, you're kind of starting out, you're fresh in your career as a teacher, then that will put heat on your back from higher ups, because why are students not passing your course? Is there something wrong with your course?
Something
Really
wrong with you as a
interesting.
teacher.
Yes.
So instead of you can't fail too many people. There was actually one of my second year. I had an innovation module, and the professor, failed 20% of the class on average. And what would happen is students wouldn't engage with him, and they wouldn't be, they wouldn't find passion in the module. And so when they got their grade back, they would complain, and and they would all basically talk together, and they would all complain together, and then you have his higher ups then get pressure on him. So
Yeah.
it's a bit fucked, to be honest. But the student is basically they're going to be it's kind of like the customer's always right. So professors have to lower their standards to students, and then professors have less passion. And this is a snowballing thing. This is like a cycle. So it's happening over and over again. So the professors have less passion, and then the new people, then there's more like lesson, then there's more sort of less,
Disengagement and
yeah,
like
more disengaged students coming the new year who are maybe different levels of intelligence who then get caught up in the lifestyle and don't try.
who have
They then get
experienced
the
like
grades.
TikTok brain from an earlier age. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what in 5 years' time that people going to university would have started using TikTok at 12 or something crazy like that. And there was a study, just to add another point, a little jab a point in here before you carry on. Is I saw a study recently. I want to say that used something like 96,000 participants, data from 96,000 participants across 71 studies, and it was a meta-analysis looking at the effect of short form video consumption. And it was pretty much clearly conclusive that it messes with your attention span, your ability to task switch and focus, and just general cognitive control, which I just think that we're going to see some sort of effect of that. Maybe not now, but in 5, 10 years' time, that disengagement we're talking about may be more and more prevalent. Carry on.
I don't think it's that university students are less smart. I think it's kind of like you identified there. I think it's that they have worse literacy rates. They can't focus or they can't concentrate for a long periods of time, and there's a crisis of original thought because they're getting a lot of things given to them all the time. So you, with this AI identification, I I think there's not a real kind of quest or a search for understanding knowledge that resonates and that's true. It's more about getting the right thing as least resistance as possible. And
Yes.
also, I think do need to caveat as well. Look, I go to the library at like if I'm in that library at like 8 p.m., there are guys that are fucking grinding in there. There are guys that like they got their own, they're on the library computers, which have the massive, like wide screens, engineering students that are sat there like looking hench and just like they're grinding. There are people that grind. So, but that's only a percentage,
Hmm.
and that's very course dependent. There's, I think there's, you have to question like, do you need to go to uni as well? Because I think there's like what I see a lot of is some courses I think are going to be more disrespectful than others. I think what was named the most useless uni degree was anthropology. Well, I actually think anthropology is probably like
Yeah, it's
quite
interesting.
important, but it's because it doesn't have like an immediate sort of worldly market like profitability, I guess. And also, I think the creative degrees were also perceived as pretty useless because
But that Jake, just to like challenge that slightly,
Mhm.
that that is based on the philosophy that a uni degree is a box you tick so you can take the next step on your career journey and get the job position you want. And it's like ticking the box of an anthropology degree or a degree in the arts or a degree in whatever creative or humanity subject you want, just ticks a box, and then there's no like end point to that. There's no like job obviously at the end of that. Is very true, and it lands with my subject of psychology, but that's just because of the philosophy that underpins that. If the philosophy is that university is the way you learn about the world and yourself, you look at it completely differently. And I think that's also like a way we've gone wrong and gone awry there, because like it's so true, isn't it? We see university degrees as a box we tick, or like university results, getting marks back on assignments or whatever, as a box we tick so we earn the free lifestyle of like living away from home, living in a flat with your friends, people your age, like being able to pursue like some hedonic desires which aren't necessarily bad in and of themselves, but the educational side of it is literally just the thing you do to earn the right to be there. It's not like you say, there's no thirst for that knowledge, there's no no drive to understand the world better and understand yourself better. And I'm the same way. Like that's why I have to caveat with that. Like my degree is a box to tick so that I can live where I do and get access to the sport facilities and coaching that I do. That's why I'm here. Like the podcast is where I learn more about the world than my degree. My degree is very specific. I've written a couple essays. Like that's all I can really say I've done with it. So what's the
I,
solution to this problem?
I'd include that myself maybe a bit in that as well. I think in a similar way that the musician doesn't really have to go to uni to learn how to play an instrument. I don't really have to go study business to learn how to do business. It's not the way to do it. And I think for me, it was like I think my parents wanted me to go, which was quite a big part of it. And I think the other like benefits of uni of like the independence and things kind of won me over. And what's the solution? Well, mm, I see myself as so the problem we've got here is that they I think personally I'm saying in a seminar and because the quality of education that the standard the difficulty has been down so much I I am disengaged because one thing big way that I need to be engaged is to challenge me to be quite complex to be sort of to play with ideas and like not really know the answer. And so I think we I think it's a practical issue because until we can really like increase the complexity again, then it's going to keep going like this. And maybe there's a difference in that some professors they know their field extremely well, but they don't know how to lecture and being engaging and haven't been had those skills. So maybe it's a lack that they have of those skills. I think we need to like somehow because this attitude is just spread and spread and spread. And I think what I see a lot of as well is I mean, in the article it talked about these disappearing students that
Mm.
students don't withdraw from their course; they just simply quit coming, and it's like chronic absenteeism, stunning levels and disconnection. And what those guys just kind of, and I'm a bit like that myself.
That's me, yeah.
What we kind of rely on is that we're going to be able to, we're smart enough to do it ourselves. We don't need any of them. We don't need any professor help. And I read a survey that it said up to sort of 66% of students cram before their exams. Uh, and I don't know I don't know how many people do cram before essays and everything like that, but it's, it seems like that's what everyone kind of does. And we all do that because we don't go we're not doing these like lectures like bit by bit and completing our modules week by week like we're supposed to. We're not going at all. And then we want the urgency and we don't have the patience. And so we think it's going to be way more efficient to just bang it in one day, which I do kind of back, to be honest. Like
But
it
Jake,
works.
I think the problem is like I'd love to know what percentage of those crammers do fine. And if we live in a world where you can do that and be fine, then why wouldn't you do that? Like,
Mm,
or we need to be in a world where like you have to do it the traditional way that they want you to for a 90% chance that you pass. Like it has in a way, if we really want people to engage, we have to scare them into it with difficulty and complexity. Like my A levels were so much harder than my whole degree put together.
you
So
reckon?
much harder. And I don't think, universities will really like me publicly saying that. Even my first year at Exeter, which was like, it's a Russell Group university, it's much more, has a lot more sort of status in the leaderboards and things than where I am now. My first year at Exeter was nowhere near as hard as my A levels because my A levels were exams, right? Where you had to get very specific wording of things. And especially biology, you had to learn the exact explanation for a certain complex process. Whereas I think the loss of exams has also killed my motivation because I was somebody who liked that I knew that on one random day in May I would have to be able to blurt this thing like word for word. And so I would work to learn it like verbatim. And then I could reproduce it again after my exams. And it's like that to me was proper learning. Like A levels pushed me. And I think maybe like you in a seminar as well, I disengaged because it's not very relevant to my life anymore. And it's not new or exciting or engaging or complex enough that I'm really in it. Like when we had Angelo on last week, for that hour and a half, I'm engaged because it's stuff it's testing my capabilities to discuss like concepts and philosophies, and it's relevant to my life. Like when he used the example about uh, looking at the obstacle from a telescope's point of view and making great notes is not the same as surmounting the obstacle. That makes sense in my life. Whereas, what I'm learning at the moment about the effect of foreign accent bias on how competent medical professionals are perceived. I'm like, it's such an obscure part of psychology that apart from the skill of essay writing and reading the research, I'm not like in 10 years' time, I'm not going to think about like this essay I'm writing at the moment. But maybe in 10 years' time, I'll be like, oh, Jacob, do you remember that guy Angelo we had on the podcast? And he used that analogy about the obstacle. Like, it's just things that last. It's more wisdom, I guess.
Yeah, uh, I think I think with it when you talked about exams, that the kind of setup for an exam is there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of pressure. You don't know what's fully going to come up, and so you
Mm,
have to know that subject in and out and know
yes.
everything about it. I I do agree a bit about the practicality about what we're learning. The main thing I guess about this practicality is I don't think that we're going to remember it in 10 years. That's the problem. I think there's a very common thing about how people say, I don't really remember what I got taught in my degree. I don't remember this specific thing that I studied. You might remember the module name, but like I feel like what I'm learning, I'm just not going to remember. I'm not going to remember, which is a bit like. And I think for my degree, I studied business at the University of Southampton, and I wouldn't recommend it to anyone that's listening because I I think all I'm learning is different models and abstractions and like literature. I guess it's different. It's like all I'm learning is like it's like diagrams of like parts of business that you don't really even need to know. You don't really need to know. I think there's like wording that like, oh yeah, there's something called electronic word of mouth, which is like, yeah, what your community is talking about in marketing. I'm like, yeah, but like, I know you know it, but you don't need to know it.
Well, could you compare that then to looking at the obstacle from a telescope's point of view and writing great essays about it? But it's not the same as running at the obstacle, which would be trying to create business, trying to create revenue, trying to build something. That's actually the obstacle. And the degree is just looking at it through, some really smart sounding academic glasses. But and there's some value in that if you enjoy it. But that's still what it is. It's still looking at the obstacle from a distance. Would you say that that's fair?
And I think that's why I had like a lot of ego problems the other day in my presentation because I knew no one else in that class had put themselves through the difficulty of trying to start a business.
Mm.
and and so I think it was like a different game. It is a different game. And if I think I want to put it back to this thing about cramming with AI. Uh, I feel like there's going to be people watching that are going to be thinking, "This is what I plan to do," and I think I actually, I honestly think like it's not a bad thing to do because it like you have the technology with AI and you have the resources that if you wanted to, you could go, I have 12 hours, I'm going to leave it to the last minute. And with this huge surge of urgency, I'm going to have to smash my module out. And what I did with my friend the other day is I paid him a little bit of money for accountability. And I said that if I don't do 7 hours of uni work, then you get to keep this £25. and I was there till like uh I don't know 10 p.m. And same with like yesterday. I didn't tell him. I told him I was going to do 7 hours, and I was working into the night till like midnight. And I think maybe it's just like another form of accountability. This you don't have to cram, and maybe if you didn't cram and leave it to last minute, you'd be okay. Uh, but it's some kind of accountability because the thing is, with this kind of like gradual, like you do your work one week and then you do the next, you're not always on it. Whereas if you're like fully cramming, there's no you're not like finding where you left off. There's no like bullshit. You're just fully like tunnel vision on your module, which I think is good.
So what your argument there is leaving it to the last minute and cramming it does create a real sense of urgency. So you just do it like you have a hyper productive like day rather than the week by week where you don't really care. And
A
then so
little bit.
that squashed time, it's like what's that productivity principle? You might know the one that's like a task expands to fill the time allotted to it. What's that? Um, the actual name of the effect I can't eludes me at the moment, but
Deep
it's
work.
like that idea that do you what?
Is it something in deep work?
Yes. Hold on. Let's give me 2 seconds. Let me just Google this. Um, a task expands to fill the time allotted. Parkinson's law. That's it. That squeezing that like module down to X number of days or X number of hours, you'll still get the task done. It may not be as high quality, but and equally, if you expand it over weeks, you'll find extra bits to do. You'll do 3 drafts rather than one, and maybe you'll gain 10 mark points. But if that's not deep to you, then maybe you can manage it. And it goes back to my thing, like that's part of the problem. If it even is a problem in inverted commas, is that you can do that and still be okay. And so if you can do that and still be okay, why wouldn't you? That's the thing. But just as a as a counterpoint, I guess, somewhat to what you said there, I was having a conversation with a friend last week, and she made this great point about purposefully trying to make things harder because she realized that she enjoys it more. And this like chat GPTification is the word that I'm sort of using for it. This like convenient, instant, quick search for knowledge or answers immediately um, takes away that joy that we can get through the difficulty of the process. And she said, for she's trying to apply this kind of thought to her life and not use these sources of convenience. And like, if she wants to buy a book, for example, she won't just look on Amazon and order it. She will go to physical bookstores and search alphabetically through the author's name and try and find it, or ask somebody in the store to tell her like where it's located, or even not go to bookstores and look in charity shops to try and find the book. And it takes time, but then she says when she does find it, the joy and appreciation you get from owning the book and reading the book is so much more than if you just searched it on Amazon and ordered it. And and can we apply that to this subject here, talking about knowledge and learning? Like if we just rely on asking a question to, an AI chatbot, we take away some of the beautiful joy of learning, and the joy is found in the difficulty of learning and the obstacles you overcome. And maybe we don't want simple answers. I think that's the presumption behind ChatGPT and ChatGPTification is that we want answers now, but that may not be true in terms of your mental health. Like, is that really making us happier that we can type any question into a search bar and get instant response? I don't know. What do you think about that?
I don't disagree. I think if your degree is like your main thing, then that you definitely should be like, I guess, taking the time to treat it with respect and be one of those guys, I guess, that goes into the library and finds the right book and then
Because
hires it out.
they probably experience great meaning in that,
Mm,
because meaning is something that emerges when you're moving towards a meaningful goal or the highest goal you can conceptualize, and it's difficult, but you're doing enough to overcome the difficulties. That's where meaning's found.
mm. Yeah, I like your idea that it's more of a process. I definitely don't disagree. I think I just kind of see this kind of like the the people around me. I think realistically, like there are a lot of students. Okay, there are some students that will do that, but there are also a lot of students that are just too fragile, and they will purposely pick modules that don't have exams in, so they don't have to do exams,
Hmm.
and they will just like look. There's this thing on ChatGPT called deep research, and you press it, and it takes like 20 minutes to like think of like you can put your whole essay in there, and it takes 20 minutes to think, and it goes through and links all the references for you, and so that's like your first draft already done for you, and then you just have to basically go over it again and just make sure that it's done everything right and double check it, and like that's a bit fucked. It's a bit like too good. I guess one thing I would be interested in asking you is, do you have any like job productivity thoughts for the people listening that are doing essays and exams that you can think of?
Um, well, it's gonna be like it's gonna be things people have probably heard before, but you've heard them before because they work. Um, the one thing I do use ChatGPT for, I hold my hands up, is speedy, like searching for papers. Before, like when I did my EPQ during my A levels, you're going through Google Scholar and you're putting your keywords in, and like the specificity of the search is terrible. Like it will just give you, I don't know. Back then, I wanted to know how muscle hypertrophy in you know young adult men links to self-esteem, and you put that in the search bar, but then it'll come up with crazy studies that are relevant about like muscle retention in older adults leading to like less fear of death, and it just I don't know that this the precision of the search is not good. Whereas ChatGPT now, I just put, can you find me a series of academic papers looking at this specific thing? And then it gives me five, and I can go and read them and pick. Like that saved me so much time. So that is the one thing I would use AI for, is this like the speed and clarity of searching. And then it's build for an essay, build a plan that is as basically as comprehensive as the essay itself, with your research links there, with what you're going to say about them, with how it fits into a structure and how you construct that narrative. Like imagining like a triangle that starts out broad, so it's like its base is at the top, and then it becomes more refined as you go down. That's like the first half of your essay, where the introduction is very broad and sort of relevant to everyone in the world, and then it gets more and more and more specific to the topic you're on. And then as you end the essay, you go from the specific back out to the broad where you conclude. That's a nice little way of thinking about the structure. And then once I have that plan, um, I just have like a couple of deep writing sessions where I put like lo-fi beats or something on, caffeinate myself, and then just take my plan. I have two Google Chrome windows open at once, one with my plan on it, one with my writing on it, and you just convert what you've planned. And if it's in depth enough, then the writing should be easy. You just convert it into sentences that make sense. And obviously, that's a skill in itself. But that's what I'd say for essays, and it comes together then pretty smoothly. I've found, but I'm not the best. I'm not an expert. And then essay wise, just like space repetition and practice testing yourself, like drawing the information out of yourself. Don't just keep rereading and reconsuming it. It's output is actually how the brain consolidates information, not input. So you need the input initially, but then you need to practice output, 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 whether that's mind mapping and blurting or doing exam questions or writing uh, answers to longer form questions or whatever. But anyway, yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah. I mean, thanks for that. I actually think a lot of what we're talking about is just because we maybe picked the wrong subject. We're not passionate about what we do. Because if I did philosophy, I would be that guy who picks out the books from the library, and I take
Yes.
time to write and really like study Socrates or whatever. So I think it's just that but then it's also like, how do you know what degree is the right one? Uh,
Also, think about this, right? When we enrolled at university, we were what, 18, maybe even 17 if your birthday is late in the academic year when you're in year 13. And the development in yourself, like psychologically, philosophically, between the ages of 18 to 21 are monumental. And so you may start with a degree subject that you like at 18, but by 21 it just feels like futile. Um, and that's just one of the difficulties of committing to something for that period of time when you're going through rapid development. I mean, our prefrontal cortexes aren't even like fully developed yet. That doesn't happen until 25. But then the other side of that for me is maybe a benefit of going to uni, which is that it buys you time to like figure your life out before you have to commit to like a job and a career path. Like you can frolic around for 3 years and manage and cram and get through. And it gives you that time to build social relationships and time to think and time to question stuff, which has helped me massively and it's helped me pursue my sport and everything. So we have always have to caveat it with that for some people it's the right choice. But I think what's most interesting is just how the philosophy towards learning and knowledge has changed, especially in our generation, and what the like delayed effects of that are going to be when we're adults and our generation are the like main working demographic, like the demographic that are keeping that are the main body of keeping society going and keeping the economy going. It's going to be an interesting few decades from that perspective.
I thought I'd pivot to some a theological concept. So for context, I've been reading the Gospel of Thomas, and the reason that I started reading it was because I had increasingly, I think, I think a good way to put it would be that I've increasingly appreciated religion slash had tiny subsets of religious experiences as I've got older,
Hmm.
and to the person that I now am, and so I spoke. So the first thing you do is you pick up the Bible and then you realize you try and read it from cover to cover and you realize the first 5 pages are just like all names of people. So you can't read it cover to cover. So what you have to do, I went to one of my religious friends and I was like, what do I do? And he was like, you should start reading the Gospels because they're all the texts with Jesus in them. So that's why I think I started with one of the other Gospels. I think it was the Gospel of John, and now I found myself reading the Gospel of Thomas, which is something that didn't make it into the Bible, and is basically a long list of like 100 sayings that Jesus said, and he says whoever finds the interpretations of these sayings will not experience death. And so that if you know all of them, like you're gonna be like good, like awakened or whatever. And so that's a little bit of context. I think one theme that I'm starting to pick up from multiple religions is this, and that I think that added gospel that really resonated with me, was this idea that being rich isn't about money. And it started actually from Buddhism, where this poor man basically goes up to Buddha and he says, I'm poor. And Buddha basically responds by saying, you have a mouth to speak your truth, you have hands to help and create, and you have a heart that's capable of compassion. So you're not poor, you just don't recognize your own resources, right? You don't know your inner wealth. But so poverty isn't lacking possessions, it's not, but it's not that poverty isn't that you lack possessions, it's that you don't know the treasure that's you carry inside, which kind of, I guess, makes sense. And I think when I was reading the Gospel of Thomas, there's similar themes where he talks about if heaven was in the sky, the birds would be to it. If heaven were in the fish, the fish would be there before you got close. Rather, the kingdom of heaven is inside of you and it's outside of you. And if you don't know, uh, if you are not know yourselves, you dwell in poverty, and it is you who are poverty. So I kind of take this and I find it kind of almost hard to read and digest because, like, you know me, I'm a person where like building wealth is kind of like my north star, and my ego almost doesn't want this idea to be true because I want people. I live about the world where I see people as impressive based on their externalities, and it's a big thing for me as this as personally young person trying to make it in business that I feel like wealth is external, so it's hard for me to read. in my head, like if you can't bench 100 kg, then do you qualify as strong? Like, so when the person goes up to Buddha, uh, so it's like when it's the same as when Buddha says to the poor man, like it's not money that makes you poor. You just like don't have a mouth to speak your truth. You just don't use your mouth to speak your truth, and you don't use your help. You don't use your hands to help and create. But then I don't know. Like I read that from Buddha, and I get like I don't know. Like I reckon he's kind of poor. But so it's just different. Like it's like a spiritual definition of that thing, and then a physical definition of that thing. And maybe you can like spiritualize you can spiritualize you can spiritualize yourself out of stuff where you don't need that like physical money and you're spiritually rich and you can elevate yourself like that. But and maybe it's the thing of if man will go to the moon because he's not afraid to look into himself, maybe like
Mm,
he doesn't have to go to the moon and he can just look into himself.
mm.
But are things like spiritual problems, are they physical problems? And I think also at the end of the day, we have to figure out like I think that they're also physical problems. Like so, it, I guess I guess my ending thoughts with this would be like I know it's true, but I don't want it to be true, and I also don't know how true it is. Yeah.
Okay. Um, Interesting. I think a lot of this is a byproduct of your stage of life right now, or the stage of life that we're both in, right? To use Carl Jung's term, we're both in the morning of life. We're both in our, in terms of adult years, we're both three. We're 3-year-old adults, and we're still in our infancy then, and we're trying to establish our egos in the world, and something that's very easy something that's very quick to appear like it will validate our ego is material wealth. Um, and that's why it can kind of take hold of our minds and our desires because it is yeah, and in other people that's how they signal their position in the world to us. How do you signal things like character and things like spiritual freedom and things like love? It's difficult to, whereas you can signal your material wealth very easily through the things you wear and the things you own. And so I think it comes back to a little bit of bro philosophy from Bugsy Malone, the rapper, that from his episode on modern wisdom, where he basically said like something along the lines of, "You have to earn enough money to be off the poverty line before you can start doing self work." And I feel like everyone else's line may differ, but you need to get to a point where you're materially comfortable enough to realize that that's not no longer the important goal. And I think as your friend from an outside perspective, I think you're that case where the reason money is so prevalent in your desires is because you don't have a great like source of it. Once you do, I don't think it'll be your goal anymore. And that doesn't mean you won't make loads of money, but it just may not be like it will just come as a byproduct of the other things you prioritize. Maybe that'll be your character. Maybe that'll be helping others. Maybe that'll be sharing information, self development, or whatever. They will then become more of the priority. And they're the things that are really, really provide you with wealth. And a couple of things that I noted down while you were talking was real poverty is lack of freedom, and money is a proxy for freedom. Money in itself is not freedom. If somebody gives you £1,000 in cash, you're not more free. But if you can then use that money to not work or use that money to travel or whatever, that is freedom. It's a step towards freedom. Um, and also real poverty is a lack of love. And so if you're worrying about money, worrying about getting by, then the amount that you'll love yourself and others and be present in situations to give and receive love will be reduced. So it's also a proxy to just have the freedom to live and to love. And that's why it's a difficult problem, because it's not a great desire in and of itself, but it does lead to things that one should desire. Um, or maybe real poverty, as I added here, is misalignment with the kingdom of heaven within, right? Real poverty is straying away from a good spiritual path, and you will feel the negative mental health consequence of an unvirtuous and immoral life. You will. I believe that wholeheartedly. But again, like Bugsy Malone says, if you're struggling to just get by, you don't have time to think about whether you're spiritually pure. There's just no time and energy to even begin to open that conversation. And I'll close with this before I pass it back to you to hear your thoughts. There's a James Baldwin quote that I learned about, I don't know, a month or two ago that's just been in my head a lot. And he just said, "Those who can't make love make money." And I just think it just sums it up so brilliantly that if you can't experience love, and maybe that term can be synonymous with spiritual freedom and with connection. If you can't experience that, then you look to money because money can be a route to get you that, or it seems like it masquerades as being a pathway towards that, but it isn't if it's chased in an egoic way. So yeah, I'll
That's
pass it back
actually
to you.
crazy. That those who don't make love make money. Wow. Wait, I wondered, well, where do you like to see do you see yourself as someone that's a bit more materialistically comfortable at the moment? Do you think that you interpret that and you see it as more truth, that like wealth is more inner?
100%. Um, I'm in a position now, and not because I'm well off whatsoever. I'm really not, but because my I'm living so below my means because of my circumstances that I don't have to think about money. And that does, and also I don't have the desire for flashy like clothes and shoes and things like that. I've worn the same pair of trainers for the last year, and like apart from my MacBook and my phone, I don't really use any expensive things. I just want to train, read, write, and love. They're my four guiding principles in life: train, read, write, love. And because I have access to that with low cost, like I just pay for a bit of food and put some petrol on my car, like I'm good. And so money isn't something that drives me. Money now only drives me for the prospect of like getting married, having kids, supporting a household. That's my financial goal. Saving money so I can do that comfortably. But material wealth doesn't drive me. Like it would be lovely to have a home sauna and a home ice bath and a home gym, but that's for 40, 50-year-old me to figure out. For where I am right now, living below your means is just so stress free. Like it's beautiful.
Yeah, I get that. I think to tie back with you're talking about freedom there, and I think freedoms and I think add on to this by saying I think we can think of freedom as an internal thing and as a metaphysical concept because we think about freedom as a guy sort of on a beach who like have like had like 4 weeks off of work and he's just chilling there. But I think I quite resonated with Camus' definition. So Camus says freedom is when you understand what causes you. So the more you understand what causes you, the more free you are. And by that I kind of mean like if there was if you were to have an impulse to if you suddenly are in Morrison's and you have an impulse to buy and if you're suddenly in Morrison's and you have a sudden impulse to go and purchase like some mince pies, like that's not how free were you when you did that?
Mm,
Like, do you know what I mean? It's like it's like was that you even doing that? And I guess it's understanding why you want what you want,
mm,
and because this can you can also think of this about like think about the reason why you do things. So it could be a trauma that's like a generational trauma. It could be social approval. It could be like some sort of like it's almost like we have like a master inside ourselves, and this who I guess you could think of it like a puppeteer would be another sort of common synonym, and that that master can also be our egos, and
mm.
so I think I think freedom is I think is a pretty good definition of freedom and a good way to think of it like that.
Yeah, two things on that. Isn't it Nietzsche that said it's not what happens to us that matters, or it's what governs you? Or that's
Mm.
paraphrase, but something like that. Like what is controlling your behavior? Like what are you being puppeteered by? Because if it's not you, it's not conscious intention, then yeah, you just ventriloquized by whatever desire whatever whim pulls you in that moment. And I like that a lot. I think it was Morgan Housel in The Psychology of Money defined wealth as as basically what you said, as freedom. He said it was something like the ability to do what you want when you want for as long as you want with who you want. Which is freedom ultimately. And if you can do that on like less money, you're still free and wealthy. And I think that's what we're ultimately looking for, is to do what we want when we want for as long as we want with who we want. But that requires like you to know what you want. That's a fucking complicated topic in itself. And then to be able to do that, maybe you have to make sacrifices. Maybe you have to do what you don't want for a little while to gain the resources to then do what you do want. But I think these definitions are similar and true, 100%.
So almost like what we want is to get to a stage where we don't want anymore. Uh,
Yes.
and because Camus was talking about how like the mystics find freedom in detaching from the individuality, that the individuality being that thing that is the mastery for them.
Mm.
And yeah, whoever loses his life shall find it, type thing. But I wanted to also uh, I think whilst we're talking about these common themes, there's this quite abstract thing from the Gospels that I found it really made me think. So there, I think they were talking about this concept that there's a self that existed before. There's a self that existed before your body, so or there's a self that existed before you were born. And Jesus said, he basically said, Jesus said, find your beginning and you'll know your end. So
Mm.
if you remember who you were before your ego, before the physical, if you remember who you are, that means if you remember who you are before your ego, then this physical death almost won't feel like a death. What does this mean? So your ego carries your wealth, your reputation, your identity, right? So if you remember who you are, who were you before your ego? You were a child, and you didn't have all this, and you realize, like when you realize you're not your ego and you detach from this illusion, then you're not experience death according to the gospel. But then what does that mean to not experience death? And I think it's that things don't kind of stop and start all the time. Things just kind of are. It means you're just an awareness, whether it's birth or death, whether you're starting one activity and stopping it. It's just you become this state of just awareness. And I think that's what then it goes back to with being the self before you. Who is the self before we were born? Who is the self before our body? I think it was just an awareness. And I think that's what it means. This kind of awareness stage like really transcends life and death. Uh, and I think that's maybe what the soul does is when you're not born, before I was born into this body, I was just a soul just like wandering about being aware of shit. And
Mm.
I was just wandering about the air, just being aware. So it's quite abstract. I guess the wisdom in it is to be detached because also there's this common theme that is like, what does it mean to be awakened? And to be awakened, I think it just means like hyper extreme awareness. I think it's in the word, right? Awake, awaken, and aware, and so I think there is something in that as well.
Yeah, I really like a lot of this. There is, if you're an experienced meditator, you do come to a point where you realize that there is a presence in you that is also you. Is this subjective awareness that exists underneath all the layers of ego and like material persona. Like there's an awareness in me that I can even sense it now that knows that ultimately Joel Clifton is a verbal label that's placed on this physical entity, and I have a set number of skills and personality traits out in the world, and there are things that I've done and there are communities I'm part of that may be used to describe who I am, but underneath all of those layers there's a fundamental awareness, and that's ultimately what I am and what I will always be. And it's hard to like live with, like, I know that's true in this conversation now when we're, evoking this kind of discussion, but it's hard to go about the world and like exist from the position of that awareness. If somebody pulls out on me in traffic, or if I'm in a basketball game and I get fouled and the ref doesn't call it and I get angry, it's hard to be like, oh, it's okay, Joel, because none of this is really that important because it's all part of your ego persona. There's no time to think about that kind of thing. So it's difficult to cultivate that awareness at all times. Um, but there's truth to it. And, I love even that point of wisdom from a religious text lines with Jung's concept of the psyche, the self being this underlying pool of both the conscious and unconscious, and it's all the things that you knew implicitly before you were born. It's where all the archetypes and the symbols live that you don't have to be explained. Like, you don't have to be explained how they make sense; they just do. Like the things you just understand implicitly from birth. They they are the things that are like ancient in the psyche that primal man still had, that man thousands of years ago was still being possessed by, these sort of psychic drives and forces. They are eternal. But they are within all of us. They are universal to us, and they are part of that underlying awareness, I think, and that underlying self. And the ego is just a little island floating around in that large pool of the self. And because the ego only has its POV of being on the island, it thinks that it is all it is. Like, it is all there is. But it's only through confrontation with the self, when you realize there are unconscious forces that the ego doesn't know about that drives your behavior, do you realize that you're just an island in a massive ocean. Um, and actually the ocean can consume you at any point if it decides to. So I think these are really important philosophical discussions. And I think, as much as people can debate about whether the shit we talk about on here is relevant or important, but I do think having a little sense of detachment and knowing that your material self is going to die anyway, and it's not really you because you're aware of it. So who's the one that's aware? That's who you actually are. A little inclination of that does a world of good, I think. A world of good for decreasing stress and anxiety.
Mm.
100%.
I think you actually summarized it perfectly, because I was actually thinking, how can we integrate this? Are we just gonna go about our lives, and when my course mate is stressing about our group project, I tell her that you're gonna die and it's not that deep. And uh, there's a part of that where I think the solution is that a little bit of detachment would do us all a lot of good. I think that's what we can try and do today. And I think that's what we do, is we go about the world with just a little bit more detachment each day from our daily stresses, and then our stress and anxiety, I guess, will go down if we act a little bit more like nothing matters. I think that's the solution here.
There's a great book called The Untethered Soul by, I want to say, Michael A. Singer is the name of the author. And one of the concepts he posits very early on is viewing your eyes like they're a projector to a movie going on. So external reality is this movie going on, but it's filmed from a first person perspective. Um, but beneath, like, watching that movie is who you ultimately are, the awareness underneath the layers of ego and persona. Um, and just like when you go to the cinema and watch a great movie, just because it's a movie doesn't mean like you don't enjoy it, or you don't engage in it, or you don't emotionally engage in the characters and in the plot line, uh, and just discredit it because, oh, it's going to end. It's a movie. It doesn't matter. It's going to end. Why would I care? Because it's gonna become nothing at some point. But your life is also like that. It lasts a long time, but it's destined to end just like a movie is when you go to the cinema. But that doesn't mean you don't engage in the story. That doesn't mean you don't give and receive love and explore the heights and the lows of human emotion and consciousness. And it doesn't mean you don't connect with people and build relationships. Like, you engage, you play the game, you really engage with the game. But underneath that, when you're present, when you sit with yourself, when you meditate upon life, you realize that it is a game. And so it's not something to weigh you down spiritually. Does that make sense? It's like it's a game, but you can play the game as well as you want, but it's always still going to be a game.
Mm. I think to go a little bit back to when we were talking about how wealth is an internal force, I think what might apply quite well is when you're talking to me the other week about this King Mitor or this
Midas.
Midas.
Hmm.
Could you tell the story about him turning everything into gold?
Yeah, yeah. So this was a what I'm reading Joseph Campbell's A Hero with a Thousand Faces at the moment. He makes like very brief allusions to mythological stories, and if I don't quite have a grip on what he means, I Google that story. Um, and this week it was the story of King Midas. Um, and it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of getting what you want or getting what you think you want right now, and also the danger of being so good at something that you feel like you are untouchable, and actually the necessity for humility even in those cases. So what happens is King Midas, I think, wins some kind of bet with the Greek god Bacchus, and because he won this bet due to luck, he was granted his greatest desire, or the Bacchus said that he would grant Midas' greatest desire, and Midas said, "I would like everything I touch to turn to gold." So Bacchus was like, fair enough, mate. You can have that. Have that skill. And Midas was like, class. That's great. He goes out and he touches like a twig or a small branch of a tree, and look at that, it turns into gold. Or he touches a stone just out in the wild, and it turns to gold. And he's like, I have unlimited wealth. I can turn anything into wealth. And so to celebrate, he organizes a great banquet with all his closest friends. Um, and at the banquet, he goes to take a sip out of his glass of wine, and it turns to gold before it can reach his lips. And he goes to bite into some kind of nice dish. I don't know, like some big ham leg or something. Oh, but as he goes to touch it, before it gets to his mouth and he can bite down on it, it turns to gold. And the saddest bit is when he talks about reaching out to hold his youngest daughter's hand, and she turns to gold in that moment. And it's one of those stories that, like, the moral of it hits you very hard. Like, his greatest desire then made him unable to appreciate the small things in his life, actually ruined those things. Um, and it was what he thought he wanted ultimately. It was like his highest desire, but the consequences were actually terrible. Um, and you know when we have this phrase in sort of layperson's terms, when someone's really good at something, we do say, "Oh, everything he touches turns to gold." But there's actually a lot of danger of being in that situation because you disconnect from normality in a lot of ways, or you lose humility. So someone could catch up to you and take you out because you're not on it. You're not thinking about, I think about it in a sporting context as I tend to do with all these things. But you're not thinking about training properly, and you just feel like you've made it already until you get humbled. And so there's a
What if every time you shot in basketball you scored every time? What would be the kind of unintended consequence that you think the story would tell you?
if I scored every shot I took, I wouldn't train as much as I do. Like that could just go straight to your head, right? You'd think you'd already make it. I'd be making GB senior squads. I'd be winning international games. Um, but think about, okay, two things. One thing just popped into my mind. The initial thing I thought was then I would kind of not focus on my training, maybe get out of shape, and not really be a good athlete anymore, lose my credibility as an athlete. But then the thing that just popped into my head just then, which is really profound, is anything I achieved wouldn't feel like it was mine because it was almost like when you just like search something in ChatGPT and get the answer instantly. It's just like instant skill and success comes to me. And so I haven't got the joy or the like meaning and fulfillment from the process. It just wouldn't even be mine. It would just feel like I've just hopped on the piggyback of some crazy like blessing and superpower that just means I can't, yes, I'm not in control anymore. It wouldn't feel like mine. And maybe that's the big profound lesson. Because
Um,
it would only, and also maybe this, Jake, then scoring wouldn't feel good anymore at all because you know it's going to happen. It's like scoring feels good, swishing the ball feels good, because you miss, because everyone misses, because it's not a guarantee, because sometimes you don't hit the mark, and that's why hitting the mark feels so satisfying.
I think it'd be good for the first day where you're like shooting like half courts.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
then the value goes down and everyone kind of expects that from you. And I think it's almost like that desire will have completed its time. It'd be like a graph when it goes down, and
yes.
it wouldn't be a game anymore. Anyway, thank you for listening to episode 121.
Well.